Well, I guess this is the FiRe Conference's experiment in having fun while working you to death. I was very surprised and delighted to see how many people showed up at the breakout session after the CTO RoundUp, after the ArchiTechs challenge was announced. And we had some lively discussions about where to go. I gradually, over the course of the discussion, backed away and then disappeared completely yesterday. If you see the TV show, at some point, Scott, if you want to put that graphic up, if at any point you ever see I meant the graphic for the TV show, whatever. If you ever do get a chance to see the ArchiTechs, you see that the conceit is, there's a little commercial advertisement there. If you see the conceit is that the general and the fire commissioner stood in front of us and said, "Gentlemen, you are among the greatest minds in America. We are giving you a tough challenge in just 48 hours. I'm going to play the role that I didn't play in the shows, and that is, gentlemen, you're among the brightest minds in America. We gave you a tough challenge. Tear apart, deconstruct, boil down the cell phone. Tell us how you are going to, either in the short term or the long term, make this do all the things that we want it to do." Tell me, tell us.
Okay, so this challenge was very intriguing to us. We probably even expanded it some. And first thing I'd like to say on behalf of the team is a great thanks to the many participants in the room who joined us and contributed greatly to this activity. It really was a team sport. It was very much a collaboration effort. And so we're speaking up here to the ideas, but the ideas actually were fostered and communicated across a broader team that worked marvelously well together in a limited amount of time. So with that being said, we're going to talk through this in 3 steps. I'm going to talk kind of about the conceptual model of what we are looking to address, to your question, David, sort of a broad systems architectural view. Mark is going to take us through the scenarios that led us to our thinking and our demonstration of the capabilities that are enabled by what we came up with. And then Tom is going to take us through a sort of a first pass embodiment of what the next gen device might actually look like.
Terrific.
So if we bring up the first chart, the deck of the next one.
By the way, you had help throughout this session by a very skilled
Joe
facilitator.
Sterling was sterling. He was, I mean, his ability not just to render, but to distill and capture thought in real time is truly amazing.
So
I wish we could have him. I could have him with me every day.
Take note, you guys who are looking for facilitators for either this kind of idea fest or a scenario fest like we've seen from Howard Rheingold in the past, or any other kind of facilitated idea festival.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So basically, what we started with was the cell phone has evolved quite a bit, and it does a lot of wonderful things. I mean, it's certainly evolved past the point of being just vocal communications platform, but now we can, those of us that care, we can do email, we can access the web. So it's becoming more of a communications device, but it's still significantly constrained with respect to where we would like it to be. So it's tough to name it, but think of it as the next-gen personal communications device. And what we want to be true is that it is a vessel, and it is a communications vessel. And we should have the same set of capabilities afforded to us when using this vessel that we have when using any other form of a communications vessel, like a laptop or a desktop or connected to the internet at a kiosk. We should be able to have access to all of the applications, all of the content, all of the services and all of the collaboration capabilities that we have when tethered to other forms of computing. And that is really a shortcoming of the current form factor and device, because we are constrained by the device, its protocol. We are constrained by the carrier who delivers content and services to us through lock-in to the device itself and to the application and connectors that are afforded to us. So what actually happens is we are very fractured when we go from one compute environment, and then we say at our office, and then we pick up our personal communications device and we go out on the road. We are now constrained to how we access content, what services are available, and what our capabilities are in a way that is not in the interest of us as the consumer or user. So one of the most fundamental focus areas for us was the notion of ubiquity, local remote transparency, that this communication device enables us to access all of the capabilities that we're able to access through any other compute mechanism. It just happens to be our mobility platform. This means that it has to be multi-protocol in nature, so that we can use the normal compute capabilities of IP, of WAP as well, and also to something that David challenged us with respect to peer-to-peer communications, the ability to discover the devices and network connection points around us wherever we may be. So for example, in Katrina, if the people using their cell phones had been able to form a peer-to-peer network amongst themselves based on the proximity to others, that would have been a much more effective means of communication than trying to go through the traditional mechanisms which were shut down. A second key aspect of this ubiquity is what we call the Web 3.0 paradigm, which is extending the Web 2.0 concepts that we are dealing with all the time in computing around consumer-oriented mashups and assembly and the way we see and interact with our application services and content, organized in a way that's meaningful for us, using service-oriented architecture. That is happening at a very accelerated rate with capabilities and platforms like Ajax. We want those same capabilities embedded in our mobility device so that we get that reach and richness of experience that we have through any other means, which the fundamental point we came up with here was that we can now ride the technology curve as the internet evolvement continues and web services and service-oriented architecture and Web 2.0 morphs into this Web 3.0 of collaboration and into the cloud access to services and distribution of content and access to applications. That technology curve would be afforded naturally to the users of the mobility device. A second fundamental dimension was identity and persona. What we all agreed we want to be true is that, like any vessel, and this is a vessel, we want our personal identity, our access control privileges, our policies, the profiles of the applications and services we want to connect to be specified by us, embedded into the device, and accessible wherever we are. So that if we take, just like we have a SIM card today, it's not just about your identity and authentication and your state as it relates to a single carrier. We want it to be our personal identity and persona for interaction regardless of the vessel that we're using. In other words, well, hold that point because I'll get to the third and then I'm going to turn it over to Mark. The third key point, which bridges here, is the notion of that this personal communications device as a next gen can actually be a concentrator for discovering devices around us and from that discovery can find and bind to those devices like we do with Bluetooth today. But it actually, through sensors and emitters from the devices, can be used as the telecommunications device to project information we collect back up into the cloud. So for example, think of Bluetooth and think of monitoring devices that are around us that might be capturing personal information about ergonomics or health and projecting that through this device into the cloud, which is a sort of a personal access network point. And if you put those things together, then you could actually use this device when it's with you to proxy into a computer that is a different vessel, and actually your information, your persona, your access roles and privileges can actually now take on the personality, drive the personality of the machine you're interacting with. So I think I've covered the overall system model. This will be much more illuminated by some scenarios, and I'll turn it over to Mark to take us through that.
Thanks, Jeff.
One quick point for the audience, that PAN would mean personal area network, right?
Correct, and we will talk about that even in the embodiment when Tom covers it.
Mark?
One of the things that drove our thinking was really trying to envision usage scenarios for different people, different sort of roles. And so let me go through a couple of these. Something that we've talked about quite a bit in different sessions in the conference is healthcare, and in particular elder care. We went through, I think one of the very first sessions, we were asked, how many of us are caring for elderly parents. And of course, one of the issues is how to provide independence for those individuals, but at the same time be able to provide the appropriate monitoring and advice and protection. And so using this paradigm, the view we had is by combining additional things in that personal area network, additional sensors, for example, health monitoring, vital sign monitoring, ultimately more sophisticated sensors around maybe body chemistry and other things, together with environmental sensors. What's the temperature outside? Is it midday sun? And other sensing such as location sensing, combining that with information from the cloud, you can start to provide real value to that individual. For example, they're about to leave the house, it's a very hot day outside, it's bright sun, maybe they haven't had enough to drink and they may be dehydrated. And that's a combination of services effectively between maybe an external weather service, the direct sensing locally, remote sensors that are tied in through the web, and the ability to know the personal information that says this is an elderly person that maybe is susceptible to dehydration, and that's a concern. The communication link also would allow this device to then perhaps alert relative or the caregiver. It's no longer thought of as a cell phone in the sense of I'm deciding as the user to make a phone call, but it becomes the link, the connection for the individual to this very rich set of services and knowledge and capabilities. So that's an example maybe for an elder care case. The one that probably most of us think about more often is, as a mobile professional, we actually have many different personas, all part of our identity. Our work persona, we want access to information, we want timely access to information, we need to integrate many different sources of information. As an example, here at the conference, we established Simon set up a wiki for us. One of the challenges was, how does he communicate to everybody that there is a wiki? He doesn't have everyone's email address. But if we had this sort of communication network, he could say, look, just tell everybody who's at the Del Coronado that there's a wiki, and for those who don't care, it doesn't matter. There won't be that many other people. That would couple some of the location awareness with the ability to do near-range communications as opposed to necessarily broad-range communications. And you can see how those kinds of things would tie into many different aspects of collaboration in the work environment. But as a mobile professional, most of us, practically everybody here, is also a traveler. And you can start to think about how this mobility becomes very important as you travel. For example, how many people that are here today have a cell phone that they brought with them? How many of you also brought a laptop device of some sort? Now, you're all mostly staying in the hotel, and I suspect in your room you have a large flat panel display. And wouldn't it be awfully nice if that small device, which today we call a cell phone, but in the future will be this kind of a device, wouldn't it be nice if when you walked into your room it detected and finds and binds to that large screen display and lets you do all of the web browsing, email, and everything else using that device with your personalization, with your permissions, with your identity in a very natural way without having to lug the battery and display and keyboard around with you. There is a keyboard in your room. I don't know if you've all found it. Couldn't figure out what to do with it because it wasn't mine.
Right.
It wasn't tied to my information. So that's an example of how this could help in that traveler scenario. And then a third scenario, which is one that I brought up early on, which is my personal problem, is I like to go cycling, but being a geek, I actually care more about all the data I collect than where I go. And I've gotten to the point where I now have enough instruments that I collect heart rate information, power output information, altitude, speed, acceleration, and I have another device which is a GPS and several others. But I have no mechanism that lets me easily integrate all that sensor information. And boy, wouldn't it also be nice, since the GPS knows where I am and when I'm there, if it could also gather, for example, weather information, and I could store all that in one place and say, gee, when I went on a ride last Sunday, what's all the information relative to that, relevant to that activity?
Plus
So-
alerts.
Plus alerts.
What's going on in the area, traffic, any possible dangers.
In where I live in Silicon Valley, it could very easily be the case that I start off on a bike ride from Los Gatos where it's 80 degrees, I go up over the mountains, and on the other side in San Gregorio it could be raining, and I would have no way of knowing that. And that would be a nice thing to be able to know even while I'm out going on my bike ride, so it's a good example.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example for sort of our generation, but I think the third category we thought about, and somebody brought this up earlier, are the kids, the teenagers. They are very active users of the technology. They use it in completely different ways. I'm sure our scenarios are not even close because we don't think that way. But some of the things that they like to do is they like to be able to get together with their posse. They like to know where all their friends are. They like to be able to leave traces of where they've been, sort of, if you will, digital breadcrumbs. So when their friends show up somewhere where they've been, they can know that, gee, so-and-so's been here recently, and now we have something in common to share. So there are lots of capabilities you can envision. Just earlier in the Inkwell presentation, one of the things that they're working hard on is how to build a portable computer, effectively, that the students can carry around and not worry about damaging or losing or breaking. Well, you think about what's big and fragile. It's the display, it's the keyboard, it's the human I/O. If instead the students could carry a very small device, maybe even wear that device so they don't lose it, and when they walk into the classroom, there might even be fixed displays and keyboards, which as I sit down becomes my system, access to my information, linked to the things that are relevant to me that I have permission to link to. Very interesting capabilities, because you break the functions between this kernel of identity and information and the sort of the mashup of what I care about from the needs for all of the other types of I/O. So let me turn it over to Tom, and he'll tell us how we're going to build that, or how he's going to build that.
Okay, so far, I think what we've done is we've defined a system that can be brought into existence in a lot of different ways. And in fact, part of our vision is that there is no one device that's going to meet all of these requirements. Just as today that we have a wide range of devices, from fairly simple cell phones to smartphones to PDAs, et cetera. Now we've gone even farther, and we've broken this down into what we think of as component parts, almost like a stereo or an audio-visual component system. And we have come up with one suggestion for how we could put those component parts together, but it really is just an example. And if this system ever came into existence, we would expect there to be many different realizations of this component architecture. And in fact, it won't be just driven by function, but it will be driven by fashion as much as anything else. So although you can't see it in this diagram, we brainstormed about whether or not this should be worn on the wrist, worn on the ankle, worn somewhere else on your body, or carried around in your pocket. And all those things are possible. But this particular example that we came up with, we drew our inspiration from Legos. And the idea here is, this is describing the personal communication device, the part that's in the sphere of that personal area network. And at the very heart of it, as you can see with the heart there, is one central Lego piece that represents the core of that person electronically. So we're going to put the most essential pieces in this heart, or we variously call it heart or hub. And for us, those central pieces have to do with core computation, core communication, perhaps most importantly, identification of the person and the person's interests, profiles, characteristics, and then a certain amount of storage, which we imagined actually not to be authoritative storage, but rather a cache of information that could exist here on the device, could exist in a nearby device like your laptop computer, or ultimately, we would imagine that most of this information would be hosted for you out in the cloud, on the net somewhere, probably by a provider who did that for consumers for some indirect monetization scheme, advertising, transactions, whatever. But I think it's been proven in our market that it makes sense to host people's information, not for the immediate return of a one-time fee or a subscription, but because that information is going to be valuable to the individual and it's going to be valuable to other people, and when transactions happen or purchases are made, that there's opportunities to take to tap into indirect revenue streams through advertising, transaction fees, things like that. But this hub will do those core things, and the memory will be, we imagine, a cache for your personal information out on the web. Now, we call it a Lego fob because, in fact, we expect the real sensors, the input and output devices, the effectors, to be snapped in to this particular device, just the way you snap together a Lego toy. So if we go back to the picture, some of those things that we expect snapping on in order to build back up to what we think of as core functionality for a personal communicator, clearly you want to snap on audio input and output. That'll be there in most, if not all, occasions. Now, that could snap right in. It could be integral to the device. In this case, it snaps in, and it could snap in physically, or if you particularly wanted to have say, an audio input and output device that was separate from the hub, maybe you wanted to wear it on your ear or somewhere else on your body, then, thank you, then it could communicate through a local, very local wireless communications of some sort. We want to have biosensors. We want to have information about the individual fed into this system, so that when Mark is out riding his bike, or when our grandmother is at home, we can be aware of what's happening with that individual, and that information can get fed up into their personal repository for whatever use that they want to make of it. We want to have location, and therefore one of the modules will provide that location information either through GPS in the short term, or perhaps through other means in the future. We want to snap in power, and I think this is an interesting aspect of this particular realization. Power is obviously a big part of any design, and depending on how many input and out devices you snap into this, your power requirements might change dramatically. And so we want to be able to snap in power modules that are sized and scoped for the device that you actually put together. So there might be a minimal power device that's very light, still allows you to keep this device on your forearm or hanging around your neck. But as you add to things, you might have to add more power, and then it might get heavier, it might get a little bigger, you might want to keep it in your pocket, or if you're a geek like most of us, you might want to strap it onto your belt. And then there's obviously video input and output that we want to have integral to this in many, many cases. And so we will snap in displays. The displays could be inches by inches, or they could be larger, depending on what the individual desires. And the video input will be some form of camera, obviously. It could be the kind of camera that you expect to see on a cell phone today. But if you're dissatisfied with that, you'll be able to snap out that cell phone or that camera, or snap in a camera with higher fidelity, higher resolution, different characteristics. So those are the basic elements of the device. And as we have said, that device is just a small part of the solution, because as this device comes close to other devices that have been designed to participate in this personal area network, other sensors, other input devices, other output devices, like the example that Mark used of the flat panel display in our hotel room. Perhaps more interesting, I think it was yesterday, the gentleman from Fujitsu talked about when you're walking down the street, you might be walking by flat panel displays that are used for advertising. Those advertisements would, if you gave the appropriate permissions, be able to know something about you and actually tailor those advertisements for your particular interests and your particular needs. So the whole element of finding and binding to other input devices, other output devices, will be a key part of what the Lego fob can participate in as it wanders around the world with you in its mobile life.
Wow. Let's hear it. Wow. These guys, you guys certainly got more abstract, general, ambitious, visionary than I think even Mark expected. Certainly beyond what I thought you were going to tell Erwin Jacobs down the road here how to do next year's model. You're road mapping us 10, 15 years in the future.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because yes, there's a vision here that can take us 5, 10, 15 years in the future, but I think one of the realizations that we had is that there's really no one capability that we imagined that's really not either widely deployed or at least experimentally deployed today. And there's really not one capability that we described that doesn't have a technology on the market that could at least be a first instance of that.
I totally can see that. But as we have 2 minutes, unless we have permission from Mark, as we have 2 minutes, I'd like really to get very quickly, so we can have time for 1 or 2 questions. Who is going to organize this? And what is going to be their financial incentive to organize this? Because they're making money hand over fist out of this terrible form factor, this really, really difficult, irksome thing that we've already got.
So just to comment on that quickly, because I think Tom is precisely right, is that I actually did some research on the web yesterday into some of the areas that we'd identified as set of capabilities. There are already companies that are building for mobile computing platforms, embeddable AJAX, Web 2.0, mashup capabilities, and web service protocol support from a traditional phone. When you look at the technology in a phone now in terms of processor and memory and storage, with flash, with memory improvements, with general purpose processors at the rate of form factor shrinkage at excessive capability, we really have all the compute power we would need to actually turn this device into a reality. And there are other companies doing very interesting work around key fobs coupled to your profiled applications actually embedded in the fob with your identification. So this is really an assembly and integration of capabilities, not rampant or rapid invention required. And it really is just another computing platform. And the peer-to-peer network, there are companies actually doing peer-to-peer networking protocols, finding and broadcasting beyond. So this is really not a technological leap.
No, I think the real breakthrough is the breaking down of the barriers, many of which are business-oriented barriers between the carriers that want to maintain walled gardens, between even the device manufacturers who want to maintain proprietary interfaces.
They're looking for lock-in from the
They're looking
business
for lock-in, but what we've got to realize is that the opportunity, the total market opportunity, becomes much, much larger as you open up those interfaces, as we've learned with the internet in general.
Yes, but there's timidity when it comes to that. If you're making money hand over fist one way, you can see the vision, but you're not tempted by it. Just like peer-to-peer, after all the discussions I've had the last couple of years with Defense Threat Reduction Agency and places like that, it's going to take some sort of national mandate to the cell phone companies saying, try to figure out at least this peer-to-peer thing. But I think some sort of grand meeting that would take off from your design and somebody applying some incentives. But we're already a minute over, so I need permission from Mark to go to the floor. Do we have permission for a question or two, Mark? Out of town. Well, let's hear it for these brilliant guys, and maybe we can spin off something.
And the people out there who help.
Yes, absolutely.